today and for attending the first ever Vegan Fest in Houston. It's really awesome. Wonderful turnout, really good food. I had some of it earlier. So yeah, we're going to get into some pretty heavy topics here. So hopefully you're all prepared to see, the life of how farmed animals live in this country and the work that I've done to expose their reality. So for me, just a brief intro, my name is Erin Wing. I was an undercover investigator of animal cruelty for approximately 2 years. Over the course of those 2 years, I conducted 4 different undercover investigations into 3 different sectors of animal agriculture, 2 dairy farms, 1 chicken farm, and an aquaculture facility. So since then, I retired in about 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, and I've been managing investigations at Animal Outlook ever since. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Animal Outlook as an organization, we are a national nonprofit farmed animal advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. that conducts undercover investigations into farms and slaughterhouses throughout the country. And this year actually marks 30 years of Animal Outlook advocating for the rights of animals to live free from exploitation and suffering. And over the course of those 30 years, we've conducted countless investigations and have used the legal system to increase protections for farmed animals from abuse and mistreatment and challenge law enforcement and courts to hold any major corporations profiting off of any mistreatment we document on farm sites accountable for abusing animals. We also educate on the ethics, health benefits, and overall importance of switching to a vegan diet by attending vegan festivals, in addition to publishing guides and recipes to help people transition away from using animal products in their meals and not support the animal agriculture industry with their purchases. So for everyone here in the audience today, maybe for some of you, it's your first vegan festival and you're curious about veganism, and I want to thank you for even being here in the first place. And if you're here and this is new to you, maybe you're a bit curious, maybe even skeptical about the work that Animal Outlook does and undercover investigations into farms and slaughterhouses. Sometimes people ask, why make a big fuss about animals? For some people, there's just a disconnect there. There are a lot of human animal suffering, and for some, they just can't understand dedicating so much time to advocating for animals. Sometimes they even ask, how bad is it really on the farms? Because there's a lot of misconception around farmed animals living, quote unquote, happy lives, and then they have one bad day. So if the question is, how bad are their lives on farms, really? At Animal Outlook, we do the work with this dedication to exposing the truth and inspiring change. And in doing so, we sort of provide a clear answer to that question. The inspiring change part is actually very important to me as an individual, because for me as a person, I'm not necessarily here to try to force people to change their minds. I'm not here to force anyone to do anything. And I don't think I could, even if I wanted to, right? What drives me really to do this work that I do, managing investigations into animal cruelty and agricultural settings, is to make the reality of animal farming accessible to everyone. And I take pride in the fact that I've worked on farms for years, and I have seen what that work is like firsthand. The animal agriculture industry deliberately tries to keep that reality as opaque as possible for consumers. And the reason why is very simple. If you don't buy animal products, they don't make money. So whatever they have to do to convince people to buy their products, they'll do it. And the thing is, they are fully aware of how bad animal farming can look to anyone who has never seen the day-to-day. So they try to paint a better picture. They recognize how important animal welfare really is to people. So they make these claims that their animals live comfortable and they just have that one really bad day. And that way everyone can feel okay with, not changing their lifestyle to eliminate animal products. And everything stays exactly the way it has always been. And regardless of how many truths leak out, when the veneer gets pulled back to show what animal agriculture is really like, as long as consumers are still purchasing those products, everything is okay for the industry because they're still making money. So this industry is antithetical to change. They fight tooth and nail to keep a facade, while animal rights advocates like myself and my organization simply just dedicate ourselves to revealing the truth and giving the power back to the consumer to decide. Anyone who is on the fence about, whether they're prepared to advocate for animals or even cut animal products out of their diet, they have the right to choose whether they want to support something with their money and be informed while making that choice. And we do everything we can to ensure that whatever choice a consumer or any individual decides to make, they have the full picture. Humans have this ability to maintain the status quo and the ability to change. All living things possess both of these contradictory traits. It's not easy to open up to a new perspective, but if someone is on the fence and they're here in this room, that's the first step. And for the next 30 or so minutes, I'm just going to ask anyone who's on the fence to do something very simple. If you're wondering, well, is animal farming really all that bad? What I'm going to ask you to do is basically to see for yourself. As someone who has been doing this for many years, I can tell you that so much about investigations work is trusting your instincts. If you look at the images that I show you and your instincts tell you that it's unsettling, that it looks wrong, and you feel sympathy for the subjects of those images, trust that instinct. Follow that instinct. It is a quality that is inherent in us all since we were children. Just the next slide. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, so most children are animal lovers, right? We love cats, we love dogs. That was me as a kid too. I loved dogs. And there were some key influential realizations that happened in my life that led me on this path to becoming an investigator of animal cruelty. And one of the catalysts was an extremely impactful experience I had that involved a dog. When I was a little girl, my mother had a relationship with a police officer who was in the canine unit, and the German Shepherd dog who worked with the officer was named JD. Despite the job that was assigned to JD, he was patient and affectionate with me, and even when I was a child and didn't know a lot about boundaries for dogs and how to deal with dogs as large as he was a really gentle giant. So one day, we were all at this officer's home, and I saw JD chewing a roll of paper towels on the floor. So my first instinct was to run over and try to take it from him, thinking it was dangerous for him to eat. And in reflex, JD nipped at my arm really quick, but hard enough to cut the skin, and it started bleeding. Being a child at the time, I saw blood, and I immediately went into hysterics. I ran to my mom crying, telling her what happened as my eyes just flooded over with tears that didn't really match the marginal amount of pain that I actually felt at the time. And after listening to my dramatic retelling, my mother proceeded to tell her boyfriend, JD's handler, and he immediately descended on JD to punish him. What he did was he poured bleach on his bathroom floor, and he forced JD inside the bathroom and locked the door. And he left him in there for some time to suffer in that really small confined space, breathing in toxic fumes. And I remember watching this and being absolutely horrified. When my mother took me aside and started tending to that bite, it suddenly seemed really small to me. It was just a nip, and it wasn't worth JD being tortured in a way that I wouldn't wish on anyone ever. And at the time, I regretted ever making a big deal about it at all. I learned later on from my mother that this was actually a form of punishment that JD experienced often, and she would feel sorry for him and let him out of the bathroom sometimes. So I still have that scar. It's really small, and in a certain light, I can still see it. And I'm always reminded of JD when I look at it, at how easy it can be for humans to forget how fractured our perspective is on the individual worth of animals. And the whims of humans, the mercy of humans, often determines whether we treat animals well or whether they suffer for our own benefit or use. That was what I learned then. And even though I was so young at the time, seeing that stuck with me. And I wish that I could have protected him. And every dog should have the chance to live like Goey is here. But growing up, I could see, how animals would be treated by people who didn't value, a dog's just ability to live free from suffering. And growing up, I knew what it was like to want to be protected. I wanted to protect JD, but I lived in a world that was really unsafe. And a lot of people who don't know about animal rights or veganism probably have the assumption that all vegans come from privilege. But as a vegan animal rights advocate standing right here, I can tell you with full confidence that I did not come from privilege. In fact, there were very few opportunities afforded to me as a descendant of immigrants, as someone who inherited a lot of generational trauma and faced the challenges of systemic poverty. And these are actual images of the places that my family lived in, and they're actually a bit nicer than the places I stayed in when I was a lot younger. I wasn't able to attend the best schools. The areas I lived in were oftentimes very dangerous. Most of the time I didn't feel comfortable going outside to play. And there were days when I wasn't able to eat 3 meals a day, and when I could, the food was not nutritious. Fast food restaurants were on every corner where I lived, and I never really had fresh vegetables before because the nearest grocery stores were usually over an hour away, and my family couldn't afford a car to drive anywhere, so corner stores with canned vegetables were the closest we came to eating healthy. Family Dollar was a frequent outing for, groceries that were just completely unhealthy, frozen foods, canned foods, all those things that, were a norm for me. My family could not afford to, get access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Mass-produced, poorly regulated animal products masquerading as these cheap alternatives in urban food deserts were really, really tempting for desperate caregivers like my mother, who worked long hours and she sought out quick ways to feed hungry kids. So fast food naturally became a staple in my diet, and it was a lot more common in low-income neighborhoods than in more affluent areas. And that was the sort of inequality that stood out most to me. And as the animal agriculture industry are huge partners in fast food production and pushing animal products on consumers, it's interesting to note that connection that had persisted throughout my life between myself and fellow members of my community of having food that was harmful to our health consistently advertised to us, and that industry pushing those animal products and profiting in a way from that. So with what happened to JD, what I saw happening to members of my community, I was seeing the reality of how people were exploited, how animals were treated, and that was something I couldn't turn away from. I have always felt an overwhelming amount of compassion because of that. I knew what it was like to grow up going without food, not having access to healthy food, to see violence regularly towards humans and animals. And I just remember wanting so badly a world that was better for me. I wanted protection for myself, so why wouldn't I want it for everyone else? My circle of compassion extended to all, and it has always included animals. So when I was younger, the only animals I was familiar with were cats and dogs. And it wasn't until I was older that I discovered that I might need to broaden my circle of compassion a bit more. So I remember watching documentaries about our food system because I was just trying to learn more about how that food at the fast food places got to the areas I lived in, just being curious. And then I ended up seeing undercover investigations footage in those films. And I wish I could say that was the turning point for me right then with the first documentary I watched, but that wasn't the case. Watching those films for the first time, though, I was disgusted and so depressed after seeing what the animals went through. When I was younger, I had seen companion animals being tortured, right? But this time I was seeing animals I'd never seen in person before go through more severe torture than anything I'd ever witnessed in my life. And it was a strange feeling because then I would watch that and go and sit down to eat a meal with chicken meat or cow meat. And I would feel awful about it. But eventually I would forget. And I knew I was perpetuating this harm, but it was so common in my family to shy away from how horribly animals were being treated for that meat and continue eating it anyway. And I was stuck in this cycle of feeling bad for eating animals, then forgetting, then seeing another documentary, and then feeling guilty and then forgetting again. And I wanted to break out of this cycle, but I didn't really know how. And then I came across a chance to look at all of this beyond the TV and computer screens, and I found the way I could break the cycle for myself as someone who was tired of feeling miserable and powerless and never one to accept turning a blind eye to injustice. I knew I was ready to see it all firsthand. So I sought out the opportunity to become an undercover investigator of animal cruelty. And I saw something that was happening to animals, and I knew it was wrong. And I wanted to do something about it. Simple as that. So before I knew it, I had gone from someone raised in the inner city who never really had any interactions with farmed animals to working undercover as a farm worker in Virginia, where I conducted my first investigation into a chicken meat farm contracted to Tyson Foods. So at this farm, there were 9 windowless sheds with tens of thousands of chickens packed into each shed. And the moment I stepped into those buildings, the first thing that hit me was the smell from the ammonia fumes. It burned my eyes. The insides of my nostrils were on fire. Every time I inhaled, it was like my throat and chest were burning. And my primary task on this farm was to basically walk through and pick up the dead chickens and kill the ones who were injured or sick. And there was never a vet on site. So instead of spending the money to treat any illnesses, the farm owner decided to just kill the birds off instead. So these birds were sent to slaughter at just 45 days old. And when it got to the end of the flock cycle, most of the chickens were still peeping like babies because they were just babies. Locked inside these sheds, standing on piles of dead bodies, never feeling the grass beneath their feet or natural sunlight on their feathers. And all of that was standard practice. It is the standard for chicken farms across the country to intensely confine chickens raised for meat, to breed them to eat until they gain so much weight that their legs break and buckle under them, rendering them unable to walk and access food and water. It was a standard practice this farm participated in when workers killed chickens who were sick or injured with their bare hands instead of providing medical care to them. And 6 years after that investigation, Animal Outlook released a new investigation of another chicken farm contracted to Tyson Foods just a couple of hours away from where my first investigation took place in 2017. So to no one's surprise, birds there were documented experiencing mistreatment in similar ways, in some cases that I had not seen during my own investigation over half a decade ago. And one of the most shocking things we documented was a conversation that took place between the farm manager and a Tyson representative when the subject of free-range chickens came up. They were mocking the perception of free-range farming. They laughed about the concept, with the Tyson rep telling the manager, "Those birds don't go outside, you know that." She said, "Free range, look it up online. They only have to have access to the outside for like an hour a day or 30 minutes a day." The manager called out the commercials and advertisements that, the manager actually, in that same conversation, just to reiterate how wild this conversation was and the fact that we were able to document it, right? The manager called out the commercials and advertisements that portray the false reality of birds running outside and enjoying the sun and fresh air. And the Tyson rep proceeded to say that is strictly for commercial purposes. They pick the prettiest birds and they toss them out in the grass. And they laughed about it. They laugh at the conscious consumer. They take pride in fooling people into believing that there is an ethical way to purchase meat from an animal. If you're purchasing free-range, grass-fed, organic, humanely raised meats and dairy, they're laughing at the people who do that. So these are the conversations that are being had by insiders in animal agriculture when they think no one is watching. This is the way they treat animals when they think no one is watching. And while the animal farming industry wants to obscure the truth, things like this compel me to fight even harder to expose it. So after my first investigation into the chicken farming industry, I had already seen so many terrible things at that point. I didn't even know what to expect when I started investigating dairy farms, but I knew I had to see it for myself. I had never set foot on a dairy farm before, and I had some concept of what the farming practices were like, but seeing it in person was a whole different perspective. For those who aren't aware, on dairy farms, female cows have babies that they basically never get to nurture. They are forced to become pregnant and give birth in order for the female cows to lactate. And I watched as they chased after their babies when farm workers took them away and kept the babies in crates away from their mothers. And a sound I would often hear on the dairy were the baby cows trapped in their tiny crates alone, crying for their mothers. And while the mothers would often be beaten, punched, kicked, hit with objects like wooden canes and steel pipes on their way to the milking area so that they could be milked twice a day, and dragged away with chains when they collapsed. On the way to be milked, the baby cows were mutilated by workers using hot irons to burn their horn tissue away. This mutilation was done without any pain relief being given to them beforehand. And I documented calves kicking, fighting against their restraints, bellowing for help that never came. And eventually they would grind their teeth to bear against the pain until it was over. And I can remember the smell of their skin on their heads when it was burning away and how it would choke me. It was so acrid. And the sound of them grinding their teeth. That's another sound that I'll never be able to forget. This debudding and dishorning is, or disbudding and dehorning is a standard practice that occurs on over 95% of dairy farms in the country, burning away the horn tissue of calves. And there's so much worse that I saw during my time on dairy farms, something so graphic and excessive that I won't get into it today because I need a lot more time. And it's just really, really intense and sometimes difficult to describe, just some of the things that I witnessed while I was undercover on dairy farms. But what I can tell you is those investigations were the hardest that I ever did. But that wasn't even the worst thing that I'd seen during my time working in the investigation space. It turns out the worst abuse I've ever seen happen to animals I recently saw secondhand, reviewing undercover footage that Animal Outlook recently released that was taken by an investigator who worked at a slaughterhouse in Los Angeles that kills cows for their meat. So before I get into this next investigation, I want to talk very briefly about a video published by the Meat Institute, which is an organization that advocates for the consumption of meat. And quite some time ago, when undercover investigations were coming out left and right, they published a series that they put out to try and just relax consumer discomfort with the way slaughterhouses operate. And they called this the Glass Walls Project. One section in that series was about how meat packing plants operate and how cattle have the tendency to go from a darker place to a lighter place. This is what was in the video. At meat packing plants, cows are dropped off there, and workers move them around the facility so they can get them to the kill floor as soon as possible to kill them and get them processed for human consumption. So the video talks about how many slaughterhouses have installed lights over the entrance to the stun box or cattle restrainer so that the cows will head toward the light there. They want the cows to go to the stun box as quickly and easily as possible so they can get on with killing them and go through the whole process of butchering them. So What do? They trick the cows into it, right? They're in this concrete chute. It's noisy with cows in front of them, behind them. It's dark, but they see a light. And they head towards that light, not realizing that that is where they're going to be killed. The beef industry established a protocol that uses the natural behavior of a cow to more efficiently lead them towards their death. Just let that sink in. And when the cows follow the light, they enter the stun box, where cattle are restrained and they're shot in the head with a captive bolt gun, which fires a steel bolt into their skulls to render them unconscious before someone who works at the slaughterhouse stabs them and drains their blood from their body, killing them. This is the one bad day that farmers always talk about, that farmed animals have to go through. Well, I've shown you how bad the lives farmed animals have to endure before that bad day really are. And our latest investigation revealed just how bad their deaths can be. The next image I won't linger on, but I want to show it after this one. Because while we were investigating this slaughterhouse, our investigator documented cows being butchered while they showed signs of still being alive. And there was one cow in particular who was thrashing and moving away from the knife while a worker cut into them over and over again. And the thing that stood out most to me about this particular cow was that I could see the expression in their eyes. For several minutes, their expression ranged from panic to agony. The cow opened their mouth to gasp, and eventually they were just hanging there, their back leg chained as they hung upside down on the slaughter line after they had been stabbed. The worker who had been butchering them walked away for a moment, and it gave a moment for the cow to have this shortest break from the torture, but the look in their eye is what stays with me. And we can go to the next slide. So it's not coming through as clearly, but right here, that's the eye of the cow. And for me, when I saw that image, when I saw the footage, what really clicked for me, watching that cow go through what they went through for several minutes and seeing the expression in their eyes for that one moment when they were hanging there when the worker walked away, the expression that I saw, this listlessness in their eye, was just, it communicated exhaustion. It's resignation to a fate that they have no hope of escaping. I couldn't even have the whole image here. This is cropped and blurred because what this cow went through was so gruesome. I wanted to give everyone here the choice that if you did want to see it for yourself, you can watch our full investigation video on our website. But this is what compels me to do this work. No living being deserves that. No living being should suffer for this industry to profit. And I keep doing this work because I've seen animals up close. I've seen pigs and chickens and cows at their worst and at their best. I know they're capable of so much if I just took the time to get to know them, to see them, to understand them. I've seen what the animal farming industry does to them. But another point I want to touch on here is that when we are complicit in this kind of suffering, we end up revealing more about ourselves as humans and what we're capable of doing to each other. And when we have the power over other beings who we don't share language with, who we don't understand, the way we treat them reveals more about ourselves than it does about them. So while working on farms, I witnessed firsthand how these environments that institutionalize the exploitation of animals inevitably led to the exploitation of farm workers. I saw an interview on the news recently where a dairy farmer admitted to employing undocumented workers so that he could pay them less, make them work longer hours, and keep his business running. Over 40% of farm workers in the US are undocumented, and there have been estimates that approximately 50,000 children work with livestock in this country. There have been investigations into slaughterhouses employing children. There is a high rate of injuries suffered by slaughterhouse workers. In 2023, a 16-year-old died after getting pulled into equipment at a poultry slaughterhouse in Mississippi. This highlights the unsustainable reality of animal farming and the widespread suffering that stems from it, which harms both humans and animals. So what is the alternative here? Can we live in a world where we don't farm animals? What about farmers? While working undercover in these spaces, I saw how disenchanted a lot of my coworkers were with how the system was designed for them to treat animals. But because they're farming them and they needed to make a living, they didn't see an alternative. So I discovered that sometimes we do things because we don't see any other way. Animal Outlook understands that there needs to be another way. And if we have to be the ones that pave that way, we do what we must for animals, for the planet, and for the humans that inhabit it. And that includes farmers. By exposing the flaws in the animal farming system through our investigations, we saw a system that was predatory towards farmers who contracted to large corporations and ended up trapped in a cycle of debt. We saw an antiquated, brutal system that needed to end, and we designed a solution. We decided to establish a program that offers a way for farmers to transition from animal agriculture into crop farming. So with our Farm Transitions program, we work directly with farmers and help them create a roadmap for their farms to move away from animal agriculture. It helps them establish connections with companies that will buy their new crops, and we synthesize our learnings from each transition to build a replicable model for future use by farmers who just need the help to discover that a better way is possible. So at the start of my presentation here, I posed the question to consider of how bad animal agriculture can be. Now, I want to ask, when we reimagine a food system that isn't rooted in exploitation, that doesn't rely on suffering, how much better would our world look if we dare to envision it? As an undercover investigator, every day I deal with holding the truth about what animal farming is really like in my hands. And every day I make the choice of what I want to do with that truth. I choose to share that truth with others. So you see for yourself and you make your own choice. So what side would anyone want to be on looking at this? A side that perpetuates harm or the side that helps to dismantle the systems that uphold that harm? So it's not easy. I never do these presentations or do any talks with the assumption that, it's going to be easy for everyone. I grew up eating nothing but canned food, fast food, grocery store an hour away from where I lived, and my family couldn't afford fresh vegetables, fresh fruits. But we also didn't know any other way. And I'm standing up here, and when I give these talks, I give them with the intention of showing that there is another way. There has to be. If we're going to call ourselves, as humans, the stewards of the land, the protectors of the planet, we have to recognize our power and our tremendous capacity for change. Maybe it'll require some learning about what the best way of eating a plant-based diet would be for each individual. And everyone is different, and there might be a learning curve. Maybe it's not easy. But seeing everything that goes on in the animal farming process wasn't easy. And whether you see it or pretend it doesn't exist, or anyone who might be on the fence and unsure about whether they want to continue participating in a system like that, they can pretend it doesn't exist all they want, but it is happening now. So I encourage people like that to challenge themselves to do something different, even if it might not be the easiest thing to do. It was far from easy for me to work undercover on factory farms. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But doing the things that are just, that are compassionate, those are the things that are revolutionary, and they're never really straightforward. They're not as easy. But we do it precisely because those actions are that. They are just. They are revolutionary. So we should all aspire to be revolutionary. Thank you. Nice. So my wonderful colleague Belinda, who also works with me at Animal Outlook, just reminded me that the photo of the cow is also on our website on the homepage. As soon as you go to animaloutlook.org, you would be able to see that image and bear witness if you choose to do so. And if you wanted to go the extra mile and actually watch the video and see what we were able to uncover during our investigation into that slaughterhouse, you are welcome to do that. So with that said, I will open it up for any questions that anyone might have. Yeah, actually, I had really illuminating conversations with some of my coworkers on some of the farms that I worked on. On the dairy farms, I mean, these are people who are dealing with animals that weigh over 1 ton, and there's maybe hundreds, if not 1,000 or more cows on one particular farm. They didn't really they more so used a lot of like physical acts to move them. They didn't really take the time to get to know them, because when they need to get them from point A to point B, it's a whole process. So there were some instances of workers sort of having these kinds of interactions with cows, and then they turn to me and say things like, oh, they're cute or something like that. But they were really, really seldom. What was so surprising to me that I will never forget, and I'll always bring this up anytime I have an opportunity to bring it up, is when I worked at a salmon hatchery in Maine. I worked with people who had been working at the hatchery for maybe like 5+ years, 10 years, over 10 years, and they're dealing with fish, right? A lot of people think that fish don't have the capacity to feel pain. And these were people who were in an industry that they were farming the fish. Like, they don't have any reason to have a connection with them or anything like that. But I remember very vividly a couple of different conversations. At one point, we were cleaning out the tank that was holding these really, really tiny baby fish. And the tool that we used to clean out the tank, it's prone to error, and you might accidentally kill one of the babies because they're so small. So the worker I was working alongside, he actually ended up, injuring and killing a couple of the really small baby fish, and he was apologizing to them. He was apologizing to really baby fish, fish that you can't hear them vocalize when they're in pain. You can just see them writhe a little bit, but they're in the water. You can't really see that well, but he was apologizing to them for hurting them. And then right at the end of my investigation, I had a really illuminating conversation with the manager, or one of the managers at the facility. And I was looking into a bucket filled with fish who were slowly suffocating to death, because that's how they would kill some of the fish on that farm site. And he came up to me as I was looking into that bucket and watching those fish, suffocate. And he said something like, yeah, it's really rough, right? The way that they suffocate like that. But I think he mentioned, it used to bum me out the way that we kill them. But over the years, you kind of get desensitized. That's what he told me right to my face. And it was just such an eye-opening moment for me. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, if you have to do it over and over and over again, you just completely disconnect. Even though you see, my perspective, and I'll leave it here to conclude the answer to this question. These are people who work with these animals every single day for years, maybe even over a decade or more. They know that they have the capacity to feel pain. They know those animals. They just have to ignore it because they're either there because they're desperate, or they're there because they don't think there's another way. And it's really sad that, there's a system that's designed to exploit animals, and there are people who are just participating in it because they don't believe that there's another way. thanks for that question. Any other? Yeah.
Have you done investigations on like small organic farms that are not slaughterhouses, that are truly free range, or just like the small boutique farms where they say that they have humane practices? Have you done investigations on farms like that?
Yeah, so I mean, typically we're trying to save as many animal lives as possible. So typically we'll go for like and hold the larger corporations accountable, right? Like the Tysons or, JBSs of the world, because they're causing a tremendous amount of harm. But recently we actually did a investigation into a brand that was selling eggs, and they were a smaller brand called Alderfers, and they had a claim on their carton that their eggs were free range, or they were free roaming, I should say. So we ended up actually investigating their facilities to see if we could see any chickens outside. That was not the case. Very straightforward, right? Just go there and see. They were lying to people, putting these claims on their cartons, and then these people were buying the eggs, assuming that these chickens were at least allowed to feel the sunlight on them. But at one of their facilities, they had a really tiny little porch that was just like attached to the outside of the barn. That was like a shed, very similar to what I just showed in one of the images, or a couple of the images that I had in this presentation. But those really long sheds with no windows, that's where those birds were spending most of their time. And they had this little tiny porch, very, very small, where maybe like seven chickens can be out there. And it was just made out of wire. So they're standing on wire while they're out there, very uncomfortable. And that was pretty much it. So no chickens outside, no chickens in the grass or anything like that, and they were making these claims. So yeah, we go after farm sites that make misleading claims, for sure, because they shouldn't have the ability to do that, right? To lie to people, but then also profit off of it, and then further cause animal suffering.
And they were made to pay $250,000, and they want to take that off their labels.
Yeah, we took them to court for it. Were there any other questions? Yeah.
So I saw you on one of the slides, a little clip about criminalizing, videoing what you do and stuff. And I just remember not recently that Oregon passed a law criminalizing slaughterhouse.
Yeah, I mean that I think that falls under the umbrella of ag-gag laws, where there are these laws that basically prevent undercover investigations from happening. For me, it's just like, yeah, they have a lot of connections. I mean, these corporations and these organizations that basically surround these farms and slaughterhouses and protect them from being held accountable, and for me, it's just like, sure, they make these claims that it's for biosecurity or whatever they have to do, but ultimately we know what the reasoning is, right? It's because, sure, people can go on a tour at a farm site, they can go on a tour of a slaughterhouse even. They can have people who go and do sort of like these checks on the farm sites that they're legitimate, people who go to the farms or slaughterhouses, and they'll check like USDA or whatnot. But in my experience working at these places, they know in advance when they have these checks that are going to happen. So they know way beforehand, and usually the thing that I would hear is that, the inspector's coming. Make sure that you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. For me, it's pretty simple way to sort of summarize the ridiculous idea that, it's not really necessary for undercover investigations to happen. Point blank for me, it's like, if you're expecting company at your home, what is everybody going to do? They're going to clean up. Nobody's going to, just open up their home and just say, come on in. And I do it all the time myself. Like if I expect company to come over, I clean up and you know, I'm not a really messy person, but I am going to clean up my home. That's exactly what these places do. I mean, what farm or slaughterhouse is going to say, yeah, come on in. Here's our workers who are beating our cows. And then also here's, you know, the way that we botch euthanizations. This is the way that we botch stunning attempts. And it happens, but, you know, most of the time at these places, you're not really going to see the reality of how they operate unless they think that nobody's watching them. And that's why it's super important for, you know, us to have the ability to do undercover work. But even if it gets more and more difficult and more states make it hard, we do the steps that we need to take in order to make sure that we can still document what these animals are experiencing and reveal that truth to the public. I mean, just with that investigation that I mentioned earlier into the free roaming egg company, the investigation that we were able to do into that facility was conducted by drone. So, yeah, we don't stop. We just, I think it emboldens us more to stay true to the course and do everything we can in order to make sure that these animals are seen. Thank you.
Are you seeing more of these transitions from animal farming to crop farming?
I think, yeah, it's been a little bit of a slow start, but we're not the only ones. I mean, in Switzerland, I think it's happening too. In other countries, it's happening. For us, we're still in the beginning stages of working with farmers, but it's happening. And, you know, a lot of that is happening with the help of nonprofits, with the help of animal advocacy organizations helping farmers. When you think it would be, you know, the farming industry helping them, but that's not the case. We're stepping in where we have to, and we do what we can to make the world a better place, however we have to do that.